Right, now we're going to head back to the British general election and all of the stuff to do with that. My next guest is the director of the Bruges Group, Robert Oulds. Welcome back to the Freeman Report, Robert.
Glad to be on the show again. Pleasure.
Right, let's dive straight in, Robert. What do you make, firstly, of all of the attacks on Farage over the weekend?
Well, if you're taking flak, then you're over the target. This is a sign of desperation. And these attacks are what's faced by anybody when they are up and coming in British politics. It's playing the man instead of the ball. It's, in a sense, really very low political discourse. It's from the gutter and sewage attacks, essentially. And it doesn't actually help the causes of the establishment that are pushing such narratives. It actually shows that there's something about this person that we need to sit up and listen. It's actually, I think, possibly helping Nigel Farage and, of course, reform. Indeed, there's such a political disconnect in this country that the main political parties have such low credibility. Sir Keir Starmer is actually essentially really, really unpopular. The only reason he's ahead in the polls is Rishi Sunak, as Prime Minister, is even less popular. There is no Labour wave. There is just a desire to not support the Conservatives. And Sir Keir Starmer, who drapes himself in the Union flag, talks about controlling immigration, talks about the impact of immigration on the least well off, denies that he wants to join the EU. Someone who is using the language, the common ground, as it were, of the so-called right, is therefore going to get a big majority. It shows that Nigel Farage is actually in the right place politically, and he's addressing the needs of many people in his country. Doesn't mean that necessarily reform is going to be the answer in the long run, but these attacks do the establishment absolutely no credit and will play to his favour, because if people will think if they're attacking him, we must like him. That's how bad British politics is at the moment. There is such dissatisfaction with the establishment parties, and people their leaders are so discredited that they're just encouraging people to support this man. It's giving him the airtime that BBC tried to take away from him.
Yeah, exactly. And what do you think about the BBC? Because, look, the BBC is supposed to be impartial, and we saw that interview with Nick Robinson. And it seems to me, and others as well that I've spoken to, that whole thing, he was just trying to get that gotcha moment so that basically it can be used by the establishment. And that's what's happened. It's a bit of a disgrace, really, isn't it, that the BBC is trying to create the news rather than reporting on it. What are your thoughts on the BBC?
The BBC, of course, a licence fee organisation, which forces money out of people they don't want to necessarily take. Other funds it gets from the institutions of the European Union, like the European Investment Bank. It recruits from a very small pool of people. It might be more diverse than even Britain is at the moment in terms of its staff. But still, it recruits from a very small mindset, from Guardian reading people, and of course, Oxbridge. Those that go to Oxford and Cambridge can get a position at the BBC. Long gone are the days when people from working class backgrounds could hope to get into such an organisation through working their way up through, say, for instance, the local press. The BBC is the establishment arm, the uber elite that govern us. They are its mouthpiece, and they have sold their soul, essentially. They are part of that clique which runs us. And what they want to do essentially is they're always looking for that. Yes, as you mentioned, that gotcha moment. It's something they want to try and pillory someone for some late night tweet sent by someone, or of course the crime of guilt by association, which they were trying to put on Nigel Farage. Which, of course, many people will think actually, it seems that this guy is thinking, actually saying what we're thinking. It's there was a Conservative slogan, "Are you thinking what we're thinking?" Then of course, other people took up the slogan. People who were on the who were politically unpalatable at the time, saying, "Are you saying what are you thinking what we're saying?" It seems that Nigel Farage is now addressing those issues, and he does so in a way which is actually part of the mainstream now. That's where we are. There's nothing radical or racialistic about the agenda he's trying to push. In fact, far from it. He actually left UKIP because he found it to be a mainstream political party, because he found it to be too illiberal in terms of sort of matters to do with integration within the UK. That is something, where Nigel Farage is actually really, in a sense, part of the mainstream. And there's nothing unpalatable about what he's saying. And he prides himself as someone who's shut down those before who do have views which are way out of the Overton window. But they're even trying to repress him and to suppress his agenda, which is actually where the mainstream are. And we know that because that's the ground the Conservatives have tried to sit on. But of course, you just have to look at their record, which is one of failure. And Sir Keir Starmer is also pretending to be one of us as well, which is, not really credible at all. So they're actually undermining themselves. But this is what journalism is now, essentially. It's in this country. You said this. We're gonna throw some mud at you. But they need to look. Journalists are the biggest, getting the biggest hits on social media are not those that have that gotcha moment. It's people like, say, for instance, Tucker Carlson, that says, "Hey, you're one of the cancelled. We want to hear what you've got to say." And people view in those on the millions, like TNT Radio. The success of TNT Radio is you're not trying to say, "Well, actually, you tweeted this," or what someone in your organisation tweeted this on some random date late at night. It's allowed. What do you think? Let's explore those views. Let's hear what's being said, and that's actually a better way of public discourse. And the BBC has moved far from that, and they are just trying to discredit people when, of course, we should be understanding where other people come from.
Exactly. Absolutely on the nail there, Robert, because look, I've had lots of Americans on the show here, and we've talked about the situation in the Middle East. I don't agree with what they say and their view on that, but I want to hear what they think. I want to hear why they think the way they do, because, if we stop talking about things, that's when we end up in real trouble, isn't it? Because then we end up with authoritarian governments that just sell one view, and then we're all told that we must do this. Now, Robert, it looks like we're going to get a Labour government. That kind of, I think we are. I guess the question is how big a majority they're going to get. Do you fear a Labour government?
Not really. Often a government that has too big a majority finds it very difficult to manage. We had a Labour majority in 1945 in the UK. By 1951, they were out of power. Of course, they created a lot of damage in the meantime. They moved the consensus towards nationalisation. They had an immigration bill in 1948, which opened up the floodgates of immigration to the UK, to the world, essentially, which was only really addressed by 1971, after, of course, action was taken after Enoch Powell's River of Blood speech, where he said things in a very inappropriate way, but he got the result that was actually needed at the time. And immigration was, to a degree, largely controlled. There were various instances that came afterwards where people were fleeing persecution. The people from Bangladesh who came over because, of course, the war between India and Pakistan at the time. There were large waves of immigration still to this country, but it was more or less controlled until Blair opened the floodgates. The ones who really opened the floodgates was, of course, the Conservatives, and was never actually properly addressed, and actually made worse. And there is an agenda there, because, of course, it's the search for cheap labour. It's to plug our economy with those who will work for a pittance, and wages essentially drive down, and so along with the national productivity. That is what's going on. And finally, someone, Nigel Farage, is now trying to address these problems. But I don't really fear a Labour government, because, in a sense, it's not going to do anything different than what the Conservatives were already doing. The Conservatives had the opportunity, and they had the promise that they would repeal over 4,000 acts of European Union laws, regulations and directives affecting the UK. We're going to have the Great Repeal Bill. They never pursued it. There were some some changes, and some changes which have been beneficial, and we have economically benefited from Brexit, despite what people, including Nigel Farage, has actually claimed. There have been clear, tangible economic benefits. There have been many problems since, largely to do with COVID and the lockdowns and the irresponsible government spending and the inflation, the enormous debt that was created. That was all to do with excessive government control, which led to, of course, more inequality because people gamed the system, as Milton Friedman said that they would. Whenever the government power increases, you then get more inequality. But Labour aren't going to do anything different to what the Conservatives would do. And indeed, the Labour project may indeed fall apart because there's going to be hundreds of people on the back benches of the Labour Party that aren't going to get their ministerial jobs. They're not going to get their gong. They aren't going to get the patronage. They aren't going to get the place that they were hoping for, and that creates disunity. And it could be the fact that there would be some kind of realignment of the so-called right. I don't like the terms left or right, but there would be people who would be thinking, right now we must actually unite. We must be following the agenda that the British people clearly want us to follow in opinion polls and in referenda and in the elections. And the next election could indeed be an opportunity to really reform the country. Either the Conservatives or Reform UK would be doing that, or a combination of the two.
Exactly. I don't fear a Labour government either. I would much rather see the Tories totally wiped out, and even a handful of Reform MPs get in. Ideally, I'd like to see Nigel Farage stood opposite Sir Keir Starmer every Wednesday at Prime Minister's Questions as the official opposition, but let's see what happens. We've got less than a minute left, so it might be a little bit unfair to ask you this question now, but do you think Brexit is dead?
I think it would. The European Union are in such a crisis that I don't think they would necessarily want us back. And if we were to join, or were to attempt to rejoin, they would make all kinds of requirements. There would be the requirement of joining the euro. We'd have to take on the debts of the European Union, which could absolutely cripple this country. The European Union is an economic time bomb that's ready to blow, and we should keep well clear. And I think pushing us back in will break the back of the Labour Party, and the British public will be absolutely objecting to that.
Fantastic. Robert Oulds, ladies and gentlemen, director of the Bruges Group.